Okay. So, hi, everyone, and welcome to Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Traci Stein, and I'm so excited to have the really extraordinary author, speaker, educator, therapist, and triathlete, Lisa Tahir, here with me. And you may have already heard her really fantastic podcast, All Things Therapy. But if you haven't met Lisa yet, you'll be so glad you did after today. So Lisa, welcome and thanks so much for being here.
Traci, thank you so much for having me on Unpacking Possibility. This is a role reversal because I had you on All Things Therapy talking about your book, Integrative Pain Management, within the last few years. And this is like
Yeah.
such an honor and delight to be on your show.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad you could make the time out of your busy schedule to be here because we're going to be talking about now I want to make sure I pronounce it properly. Chiron or Chiron?
You got it, Chiron.
Chiron. Okay. The Chiron effect, healing our core wounds through astrology, empathy, and self-forgiveness. Um, I'm not finished reading it yet, but I can tell you it is so engrossing. It's fabulous. It's helpful. It's so approachable. And I really want you to tell our listeners about, what inspired you to write this book, what you think that they can take from it, and really anything else you want to share.
Sure. You know, I think well, I know for myself and a lot of people that write books, that invent things, we kind of fill that gap for what we don't see. And here's little smelly cat. I know you're a pet fan too. It's my
Huge
little
pet person.
baby. She loves being in Zoom videos and interviews. So
That's great. So when people look at the YouTube version, they'll be able to see her, which is awesome.
yes,
All the
thank
pet
you.
people.
So, I wrote this book to fill in the space, Traci, of having been a therapist for over 20 years, as well as being a client in therapy in my own healing journey, that I started to get kind of embedded in the old story, both in my own personal life and with clients, and felt like it became disempowering at some point to keep going over the old story, the old narrative of the woundedness, the abandonments, the things that didn't work out. And even a therapist I had was like, you need to go back to this, this wound and this all these feelings. And I started to feel in my body like this isn't the right way to proceed at a certain juncture in one's life. Like what about what's beyond this? Like the new story of who I want to be and kind of reaching for those skills and those beliefs and that mindset. And so that caused me to start meditating about what can I offer the field? What can I offer people to kind of take it beyond where you might be and into something more joyous, more fulfilling, which I knew is what I saw for my life and wanted, but just wasn't sure how to get there. And that's where in meditation, I started hearing Chiron, Chiron. And all that I knew, Traci, about Chiron was a reference from grad school at Tulane that Carl Jung wrote about Chiron as a wounded healer archetype. It didn't feel like that was very significant. And I was like, all right, universe, like Chiron, really? And, seriously. And then I didn't feel very excited by that, but I kept hearing, like almost being prodded, Chiron, like go effing research it, like get on your computer, Google Chiron. And I just started to find how Chiron was so many things in so many ways for a number of years. First in astronomy, identified and discovered in 1977 as both a comet and a minor planet that has an elliptical orbit between Saturn and Uranus. And it was named Chiron to reference the Greek centaur, the Greek mythological centaur, who was the founding father of the healing arts, of medicine, of pharmacy. And when we go to the doctor's office and you see the staff with the two snakes, the staff of Asclepius, Chiron actually gave that staff to Asclepius. And I was like, okay, well, this
Oh,
is
wow.
interesting. Yeah. So I still thought this is interesting, but like, how does this relate to what I want to do and write? And then I was led to, again, Carl Jung, the wounded healer archetype, and our collective unconscious, speaking to just kind of the collective wounds, but also most importantly, the propensity to heal them. And I started feel into a space of empathy and forgiveness, having to do with that path to healing and really emotional freedom. And then lastly, it led me to astrology, where in your birth chart, when you plug in your date of birth, your place of birth, you will be generated, besides, like, you might know your sun sign is a Libra or Gemini, and your moon and your rising, that there's Chiron in your birth chart. And this identifies what I took 3.5 years to research and write, a placement of our deepest area of vulnerability, wounds, even for some people, when you've experienced traumas, for example, that it leaves an area of our personal development, of our psychology, of our the way we relate to ourselves in the world, that we might want to hide or edit, like we feel embarrassed or even some shame maybe around a certain area of our life, a certain topic. And this really generates us not living as our full selves. And it's like this patterning that the object relationist talked about and Freud talked about in the repetition compulsion. And it's really like this orbit of frequency that we have around people, places, and things based upon what we believe to be true. And we can only go as far as our biggest limiting belief. And so I'm just going to stop to check in with you. Like, what, I'm wondering what you think about all this.
Well, first of all, I'm blown away at how beautifully you described all of these psychological concepts and, marry them with mythology and did it in a way that I think people even outside the field can understand.
Thank you.
And that's vital. But I love how you say that, we are limited by those things that we haven't addressed.
Right.
Those things that we're not aware of, maybe that we haven't addressed, our own kind of vulnerabilities. It keeps us from doing or being, all that we really can and want to
Yeah.
be.
Well said.
And I love that in the book, you're very brave because you talk about your own journey. And that's such a hard thing for therapists to talk about. And yet we are human beings and our own experiences increase our empathy and insight for other people.
Yes. Yes, it definitely does. And I know I was trained not to talk about myself at all in therapy. And I still am a believer of only if it's really going to be helpful to the client.
Right.
Like, I feel
Exactly.
like it's really your time, when you're with me, like it's all about you. And so I still, go towards, like there's other ways to help people see things besides, I think, talking about yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I thought in my book it was important to, like you said, become relatable, that I have like endured is what's coming out of my mouth, so I'll just go with it.
Yeah.
Things that I felt like I was enduring great hardship as a younger person and in my family, and having to really reach beyond what I knew to develop skills of communication and even having empathy and forgiveness for myself without judging and blaming and shaming myself. And then that's what gets directed upon others. I reflect when I was more critical of myself, I was super hard on others, Traci. Like, it's like nobody could do well enough at all. And that was reflective of how I held myself to these impossible standards. So it's about this kind of like softening into, like you said, like we're human beings doing the best we can. And when we support ourselves to be open to how we can heal and grow, it just makes that process, I think, softer and easier and more joyous instead of something we resist. What do you think?
Well, what's so interesting is as you're talking, what I'm thinking of is that, it's such a hard balance to get people to look at these difficult things because doing so can really amp up that shame, amp up that
Mhm.
self-criticism. It's the kind of thing where it's like we just we kind of want to flee from those things because they can feel so
Right.
overwhelming. But you do it in such a, like you said, a soft and a gentle way, a compassionate way that makes it safe for people to do so.
Thank you.
Um, Absolutely. You say in your book basically that it's okay, I'm paraphrasing, but not to have it all together. Like,
Right.
it's not like we need to wait till it's all checked off. That doesn't
Right.
really happen anyway.
Totally. No,
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
go on.
No, I marked something down in your book because I feel like I'm jumping all over the place. So definitely jump in at any time. But so far I've gotten to a place where you've alluded to intuition. I haven't gotten to the real nitty gritty of that yet in your book, but you and I very much believe that there is a larger kind of connecting principle.
Yeah.
And when I was actually reading your book, and I thought, this is the passage I needed to read today. And if you're okay, I'm going to read it.
Please. Yes.
It's on page 40, because, as you just mentioned a few minutes ago, when we're very critical of ourselves, it's very hard to be objective for other people. And we have different ways of either taking too much of other people's stuff that they want to throw at us and not standing up for ourselves, or being too critical of others, or maybe both. But I think there's this myth out there that for us to be compassionate people, we have to say yes or not, call things what they are and set limits. And I love this kind of imaginal mini exercise that this paragraph evokes. It's on page 40 about difficult people, because difficult people, some of them really, their own wounds are that they can't help but try and trigger that in other people, right? The chaos makers of the world. Inadvertent or purposeful. And you say, it may help you to visualize the other person's emotions as a color or a shape. I thought, great hypnotic technique. So that you can imagine blocking them, putting them in a box, walking the emotions out your front door, sending them out of a window, asking them to leave, or sealing yourself in love and light. It may also help you to name that annoying aspect of the person who is triggering you. And I thought that was spectacular. Because again, we can be compassionate and still call it what it is. You can choose to refer to it as that person's alter ego, 10-year-old self, I think like maybe even 2-year-old self, right?
Yes, for real, 2-year-old self. Yeah.
Or your favorite nickname in order to bring some humor to the situation. These are mental, psychological techniques that take the power and emotional charge out of challenging interpersonal interactions. I have to tell you, as simple and clear and straightforward as that is, I think that, is magic.
Thank you.
Because it gives people who want to do better permission to also just not feel like that means that they can't, set healthy limits and take good care of themselves, and bring humor to the situation, right?
Yes,
somebody 2-year-old Sally or whatever.
Totally.
We have to just be like, all right, toddler Sally.
Yeah. And even you saying it that way, it was so helpful when I started to kind of see that, instead of being so serious and critical and like, this is terrible and, just catastrophic, to see it as, what about humor? Like, it really is someone's 2-year-old, as you said. It's their, parts that aren't like, we're like diamonds with all these facets, and some of them are beautiful and others are a bit rough. They haven't been polished out yet. And when I started to really understand that, it's like, oh, I can be okay about this and not take it so personally, not judge them so harshly, and even send love to that situation metaphysically, spiritually, be in non-resistance within myself, which feels so much better in one's mind if you adopt like a non-resistant kind of position, where it's like, what do I have to learn here? Because every time that I'm triggered, Traci, it's revealing something within me that's a bit rough. Like, otherwise things really roll off your back like water on a duck's back. So it exposes for me an area where I can be more empathetic to myself, love myself some more, forgive myself, or look back to, clearly there's something I didn't get. Like, this person's triggering me. I'm angry. I'm upset. I'm been out of shape. What does that reveal about me? And again, it's not saying and everything someone does is okay, but it's what you do with it, that it can be a way to kind of more deeply excavate your own mindset and belief system, and then bring something to
Lisa, you just froze up. The challenge of Zoom, right?
serve you. Like, you might not want to reach. Oh yeah. Is it better? Is it okay now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry about
cool.
that.
No, it's okay. So just pausing there. Thank you for reading that. And I know you as a hypnotherapist, I never thought of that as being kind of in that vein of what you do.
Well, it's funny because, what I tell people is that, so much of our everyday interactions are hypnotic. Our brains are wired to be able to benefit from that for better or worse. And, I was thinking about this the other day and I wrote I recorded a little thing that I haven't posted yet, but, our trances, it's just another lens for thinking about this stuff. But like, you know, our movies in our minds that have often, kind of been installed early on, and then they just really take on a life of their own. It's very multisensory. And the
Yes.
way we, um, imagine things will go, or the things we wish we had said, or the things we did say, or the things we didn't say, and the way even these interactions that have concluded still live on in our minds can really shape how we
Right.
think about ourselves and interact. And you allude to that in the book. But even your writing, like whether this was intentional or not, you're really good at bringing in metaphor as a teaching tool and bringing in multisensory ways of describing things in a way that's healing. So your use of language, I think, in and of itself is very healing.
Thank
And I
you.
think that's your energy and mindset as you were writing this book. I mean, you can really feel it. And in fact, I should mention that His Holiness the Dalai Lama endorsed your book. Does it get better than that? I don't think so.
Thank you. That was like, it still is like, oh my gosh, His Holiness, just a beautiful blessing and gift. I have so much appreciation that he actually read every page, because it was evidence in the full letter that I received from him, like hitting points about my book. It was just such an honor. And I'm so glad I took the risk to reach out and ask, because sometimes
Wow.
we have these desires and it's like, oh, that's too big, that's too much. And I figured, the worst thing that could happen is I don't hear anything, but at least I tried. And I'm never going to regret having tried. So I encourage you listening, watching, whatever that is that feels like a bit out of your reach, like do it, try it. You're just gonna you're going to be happy you did, in just simple language.
It's just amazing, honestly, and well deserved.
Thank
Super
you.
exciting. I'm wondering if you can explain how people can now get into the astrology part,
Okay.
because you do such a great job of describing the psychology, which is probably, even though everybody isn't a psychologist or a therapist, some of these terms are, things that people may have heard, and then there are a lot of people who know something about astrology, but there are probably people who don't.
Yeah. No, I'd love to. And for me, Traci, this was a reach because I am comfortable in the wheelhouse of psychology, of personal growth in that way, having been a therapist for 20 years. So for me to reach into astrology felt kind of scary. Like, who am I to do this? But it became so abundantly clear that Chiron, and knowing where your Chiron is in your birth chart, is so powerful that, like, 99 out of 100 times it's been really accurate for people that see where Chiron is. Is it in Aries? Is it in Taurus? Is it in Gemini? And again, by plugging in your date of birth and your place of birth, I have an interactive website that you get with the book, as well as there's a chart. And additionally, if you know your time of birth, not everyone does, so that's not as important. Your time of birth will give you the house, the astrological house that Chiron is in. And all that means is that's the area of your life that it manifests. There are 12 houses, 12 areas of one's life, be it your professional life, your intimate life, your self-esteem, so it'll just give you where it manifests. But I think you'll kind of know that once you know, like, if your core wounding, if your vulnerability is in Aries, which is a core wounding to your sense of value and worth, versus Chiron in Taurus, which is a core wounding by neglect, or Chiron in the sign of Cancer is a core wounding by abandonment. And there are 12 of these that I speak to, and they really address things in life that we go through. So even if your Chiron, you know, your Chiron is in one sign. If you understand all of these 12 areas, it'll just kind of help you navigate life as you go through things. There's like, because I give takeaway steps that are practical and usable, as well as affirmations. Is this answering the question?
Yeah, it is. And
I know I'm kind of going all over the place.
no, I think actually it's perfect because, I know some people listening to the podcast or seeing this on YouTube will be like, great, now how do I begin to understand this better? They're going to buy the book, but they may, have a question in their minds as they're listening. Well, how do I find out, what my key kind of areas are? Where is Chiron showing up or an issue for me?
Yes. And that's again on my website and in the book, where you can plug in your birth data and it generates that Chiron placement. And though, Traci, I encourage readers to read the book from the beginning to end, because I did lay it out as a process, as a self-healing process, that you start with creating the container for change, where it's as simple and practical as I invite you to get a journal and a candle and designate, say, 20 minutes.
I love it.
Because, to like write, because I asked you some questions about yourself as I share some things about my life to get the juices flowing, to go back, to that child you were, go through some of your own memories so that we can make sense of your patterning now. It's all about making sense of our patterns and then where we want to change our patterns and change our thinking that influences our patterns. That is the Chiron effect. We affect our orbit by our thought frequency.
Can you say a little bit more about that so people know what you mean by thought frequency?
Sure. So what I've come to learn, Traci, is that thoughts carry frequency, emotions carry frequency, matter carries frequency, and that's simply the rate at which it vibrates, and it's measured in the unit of hertz. So genetic biochemists, for example, are using 528 hertz to repair damaged and broken DNA. And 528 hertz is the frequency of love, the emotion of love. So when I started to see that, I'm like, this is really powerful, that our thoughts, you can feel it in your body or in music. Music carries frequency and is measured in hertz. Songs that have the undertone of depression can make you really sad versus songs that have like happiness, so it's like we see this in our music, the TV shows that we watch. It's all really about frequency. And that is reflected in our thoughts. When you're believing well about yourself, that's why people say I'm high vibing. You're at a high vibration, literally, when it comes to hertz and what that measures. And so I've learned that we're like our own little solar system. We are planets orbiting other planets, you and I orbiting each other during this show. And so we attract based upon that frequency that we're emitting, the thoughts that we're thinking, that then inform the beliefs that we have. Like if life, do we believe life is really here to benefit us, to serve us, that we're safe in the world? Or because of childhood trauma, do we believe it's unsafe and it's dangerous? And that frequency is being emitted from you and then attracting like circumstances and people, places, and things. And I believe we have free will to change all of that. And it's just by really reaching for better feeling thoughts, doing the healing work where there has been trauma and abuse, for example, and really in an authentic way, not like a just positive thinking way, like a truly heart centered, authentic belief in that we're safe, that we're loved. And it's through forgiving ourselves. And then we're able to forgive others. And it's progressive. I've learned that this all kind of melds together into what my book is about and offers. Does that answer adequately?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting that you're talking about that, because like I feel like somebody of these concepts, sometimes the way, somebody might have a slightly different framework and phrase it a little bit differently, but these concepts translate well to other ways of thinking. Again, like psychologically, whether we're thinking about astrologically, whether we're thinking about this, I love that you talked about the vibrations of things. I've used binaural beats myself
Oh, yeah.
for I feel like a
Yeah.
million years, I've started incorporating it into my imagery and hypnosis. And, I was thinking in terms of like, with biofeedback, how certain hertz correspond to certain brain
Yes.
states. And as I started looking at more of the music that you can, purchase to use in your audio recordings, it went way beyond the simple, like, delta wave for deep sleep and beta wave for, concentration and so forth. Not that those aren't useful, but like you were talking about these other types of frequencies. um, I forget the actual, you might know, but there's like considered a frequency of the universe.
Oh,
um,
right. Is that the Schulman
yes,
resonance?
yes, it's like the Schumann resonance, I
Yes.
think. And I'm fascinated by that, because
Me
you're
too.
100% right. Listening to even wordless music that is imbued with these frequencies does create this shift that's very hard to describe.
In the brain, the neurons of the brain are affected. I know you know this more than I do, being a hypnotherapist and such, but it's been like mind blowing to me, literally, that we can
Yeah,
change the neurology of our brains through these frequencies and be happier and healthier and really have the life that we want. Like, why wouldn't you take some time each day to explore that?
absolutely. And it's such a simple, non-invasive way to do it. But
Right.
what you're talking about too is that shifting the focus of our thoughts, the focus of our attention and our emotions. I mean, that shift goes way beyond our own physiology and
Yeah.
emotional state. And it's one of these things that, I think people who, maybe are newer to this might be like, well, how is that possible? But I think anybody who really thinks about it can recall a time when they felt like their day was just crap, and
Hmm.
everything they encountered in that day just kind of amplified that feeling. And that feeling seemed to just almost magnetize, you know, someone cutting them off on the highway,
Right.
but a series of things. Like when we're really angry, it's hard not to attract angry people
Right.
and repel people who just feel it. Um, you and I are comfortable talking about things in a more metaphysical way, but
Yes.
even people who aren't comfortable have had the sensation probably of walking into a room where maybe people have been arguing. And even if you walk in and no one says anything, you can
You
kind of,
feel it. Yeah. And
you know,
likewise, when you walk into a room where there's been something awesome happening, or like certain music, symphonies, and it's like you really feel uplifted, or even around certain people that you
yes,
just are drawn to, and like your word is so accurate. We magnetize to ourselves the frequency of the thoughts that we are thinking and the beliefs that we have. And we have say so over that. It's not just left up to chance, which for me was the most exciting thing, that we get
oh,
to choose. And it's like, oh my gosh, so I can take some time each day to meditate and get into like at least a neutral vibration, and then choosing, like, I intend to attract wonderful experiences and people today. I set an intention each morning just for the most awesome day and to be prepared. And you can do that too, even in the shower. Like, it
absolutely.
doesn't take much for the universe to respond to your asking.
It's absolutely true. And the one of the other things, many things that I like about your book is that you have a nice balance of, describing an example, but then also these places with these kind of checklists, wait, or maybe that's not the right term, but these things,
It is.
how
Yeah.
you will recognize if something is out of balance,
Yeah.
different ways that might manifest or appear in your life, and specific practices broken down in a way that is really user friendly and simple for people to know what they should do. Because
Thank you.
if we just talk about, well, raise your vibration or practice gratitude, that can be really hard for a lot of people.
Or it
But you
doesn't really
make it
stick.
easy.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. I wanted things, I love practical wisdom, like some suggestions, and mine are just to get you started, your own creative juices flowing, and you take it and expand from there. And I also invite people to apply their own belief system. Like I talk about how I believe in spirituality and taking personal responsibility along with sound psychology. And yet you might not, believe in spirit or God. Apply, in nature, whatever you believe. I invite you, there's a section early on in the book to like, you know, take what you believe and assimilate this into
Right.
whatever that is, because I just think, it's a different perspective, a different way to look at life and yourself to have more happiness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I want to talk a little bit about you, if that's okay,
Yeah,
because
cool.
you have this really remarkable way of embodying
Mm,
the things that you talk about in your book. So even if I didn't know anything about you, and I knew that, I mean, you're an artist, and there's
mhm.
something incredibly healing and wonderful and powerful about creation. I love that you take found objects. You recycle things. You described it, I think, as other people's trash,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that has been beautifully worn by life, and you make it into something even more beautiful. To me, that is powerful and metaphorical on all these levels. Can you talk a little bit about your art?
Sure. Thank you, Tracy. I've been a glass artist and a mixed media artist for over 20 years. It's like my therapy. It's like I sell some pieces, yet I haven't felt led to, like, I don't know, go market it everywhere because I just find it so gratifying. So as a glass artist, I cast molten glass into steel molds. And I've done this series called Memory Impressions that I talk about in my book. And I didn't realize that. And you, okay, help me with, like, is it the hippocampus where there's literally divots of memory, like memories impressed in a certain area of our brain?
I mean, that sounds about right to me. I'm not a neuroscientist, but the
Okay.
hippocampus would be a place where we would store memory and remember things and recall memories. So yeah.
And so I didn't realize that quite literally there are these memory impressions made upon that area of the brain. And for years, I've made like hundreds of these glass pieces with a divot, and they're called memory impressions, representing all of these memories that we walk around with. And so for me, it's kind of like a literal representation, and they hang on the wall or they're tabletop pieces. And so that's been something, even though it's repetitive, I don't know, it's been something very, like, I love making them. And then additionally, I've incorporated found objects, like here in Los Angeles or in New Orleans, I'll find like a nail on the street or something. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to use that one day. And into these assemblages on wood that are panels that just kind of like speak to me how, we get worn around our edges. Like life, hopefully, if you're open, will kind of evolve you, erode you into something more beautiful. And, over time, if you let it, it's our choice. Again, we can get jaded and hard, or we can become, I don't know, wiser and calmer and such. So it's up to us. And so I just love art, like you said, as a metaphor of our growth and development, and glass in particular, because it goes from a molten liquid state to a solid state. So it transforms as you work with it, much like we transform in life.
Beautiful. Beautifully said.
Thank you.
And it's funny, as you were talking, I know this isn't necessarily the major component, but I was thinking of sea glass.
Oh, I love sea glass.
But just, like you were saying, we or the glass could be broken and sharp and just look like something to be kind of cast aside or just something
Yeah,
damaged. And, you know, sea glass is uniquely beautiful,
it
and,
is.
things get tempered or
Yeah.
remolded. They get a patina. you know,
Yes,
from
such
the,
a good word, a patina. Yes, I
from
love
the
patinas.
metal.
I love patinaing, if that's the word, like
Yeah.
metals or plaster. There's so many. I love patinas. I think they're just beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so perfect with the work that you're writing about and what you're encouraging people to do.
Thank you.
We don't need to think ourselves as broken. And again, many times throughout your book, you talk about those wounding um, events or experiences as you know having the potential to help us grow. And
Yes.
you know, yeah.
Well, and Tracy, how many times has someone come to meet with you and they just feel like something's wrong with them. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, we really make sense in the context of our experiences. And we have certainly gone through things that were wrong, but it doesn't make you wrong. So I hope an intention of my book is that you really learn kind of the rightness of you, and just understanding how experiences have shaped you, and now how you can take personal responsibility to shape yourself and make meaning of what's happened, so that you're living from the potential and not from the kind of like what it could take away from your life.
Right. It's just so moving hearing you say that, because you're absolutely right. There's something so powerful about someone being willing to be vulnerable enough to show you
Mhm.
those rough edges.
Thank you.
And yeah, and you're inviting people to do that also,
Yeah.
even whether or not they come and sit across from somebody like you or me,
Right.
they can still do a lot of that transformative healing work. And it's kind of like pulling the lens back and looking at yourself from a new perspective. And
Yes.
yeah,
And to end suffering.
yeah,
Yeah, a way to end suffering within ourselves, and then that's reflected in the world.
absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I like also that you are someone who challenges yourself
Mm-hmm.
to do things that seem really hard or impossible for most of us mere mortals, like doing triathlons, which is mind blowing to me, because I feel like, after 3 miles, I just want to stop running.
Right. Well, you have to work up to it gently for sure, or else, I've sustained injuries from ramping up mileage way too fast. And so it's all a learning process too. And I don't do triathlons anymore. I feel really satisfied in having done them. And now I love fitness for fun. It's like my playtime. Like, I feel like a kid when I go to the gym, and it's just like, body, what do you want to do? And I'll do that. So I've really changed that, because it used to be kind of like this hard driven, I have to do this many miles because that's going to make me feel worthy or good enough. And then I realized it's so not necessary. I'm glad I did them, and I'm glad not to do them now.
And I love your honesty.
Thank you.
But like, that is so perfect, because so often, our own wounds can make us take behaviors that could be healthy,
Oh,
right?
so well
Like,
said.
whether it's, the latest health diet, healthy diet, in air quotes, or exercising, or this, that, or the other thing. And it's like the motivation, our attitude and our approach, and how loving we can be toward ourselves as we do something, makes all the difference. Um,
Yes,
Between
that's so well
forcing
said.
yourself to try, push yourself into a little box, versus um, to celebrate yourself. I love that you just said, body, what do you want to do today?
Yeah,
And, you know, moving your body is a wonderful way to discharge some of the energy that gets kind of built up
is
when we are exploring stuff that's hard.
right. Absolutely. That's so well said. And our body wants to release. I often, you know, uh, invite clients to, especially anxiety. It wants a physical expression out of your body, to take a walk, punch a punching bag if you have access, whatever it is, to viscerally and physically remove and release anxiety. And I think, as I'm saying this to you, depression as well. And what do you think about that? The emotions in the body and that physical release.
Oh, 100%. And, I mean, there's good data showing that exercise does improve things like depression. It improves anxiety. And, and even what I've explained to, clients is, you can't be as anxious if you have just expended
Right.
physical energy. You
Yeah.
can't be as depressed. You
Yeah.
can feel tired. And, it certainly doesn't change the external world, but it absolutely changes what we're holding and how we're holding it. Um, and
Yes.
it's very, it's also very meditative. So for
Hmm.
the people who say, I can't do seated meditation, I'm too antsy, it brings up too much, you know, mindfully jogging
Yes.
or swimming or walking.
Absolutely, Tracy. And I learned too, I read in an article years ago, and it speaks to your work with hypnotherapy that, running, I used to, when I ran often, it's like I'd zone out and I felt like really good, and how it is meditative because it's a repeated action that kind of you don't have to think. And so just for the brain, and even it was almost like hypnotic. And I didn't
Very.
realize there's research about that it is hypnotic.
It is hypnotic. And I think not only is it freeing, because again, we're generating these we're looking at these things closer and closer. It brings up emotion. That's a wonderful release. But I feel like people get their aha moments a lot of the time when they're doing something like rhythmic exercise, or when they're walking in
Yes.
nature, or when they're journaling. But when we can take our focus and put it on something specific like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Lisa, I want you to, I'm wondering if there's anything I haven't asked you that I should have, or that if there's anything else you want to share about your book, something you want to leave people with, and please also share your website and share where they can find your book.
Sure. No, this has been awesome, Tracy. And I'm so delighted to be with you in this way because when we met, I felt an immediate resonance, and I'm
Likewise.
glad we've stayed in touch. So this
Yes.
is so meaningful. And I feel like we've covered all the main points. And I would love for listeners and viewers to go check out my book. It's available like in Barnes and Noble stores, as well as on Amazon, Walmart.com, Books a Million,
Awesome.
and through my website, nolatherapy.com. It stands for New Orleans, Los Angeles Therapy.com. I have links under the book button to some of those retailers. And if you have a specific local bookstore that you like to shop at, because I do in New Orleans, Blue Cypress Books, you can go in and give them my name and the title of the book, and they can actually order it for you and they'll get that benefit. So I encourage you as well, if you like to shop local, to just go ask your bookstore to carry my book and get it for you.
That's awesome. And I will post the links to your website and so forth when the podcast gets uploaded. But I want to thank you so much for being here. It is such a pleasure. I've so enjoyed getting to know you.
Me too. And your pets, I love seeing your little doggy and kitty cats, like when you post, and I know
thank
with
you.
my cats. Yeah.
And I'm so glad your kitty joined us today. That's so exciting.
She did. No, this is awesome, Tracy. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And again, everyone, this has been Unpacking Possibility. I know you enjoyed hearing about Lisa Tahir as much as I did. And if you like the podcast, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and leave a comment. All right. Thanks. And until next time, be well.